Hi, my name is Dr. Eugene Lipov. I'm a Chief Medical Officer for Stella Center. I'm an anesthesiologist who's pioneered using stellate ganglion block for PTSD. We're going to discuss today PTSD being a real biological change in the brain, not a psychiatric disorder. We are going to talk about that PTSD can be caught like a virus, that it can be transmitted to a family member, and you may be leading a team of traumatized people and how to work with that.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, he's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. What do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, as you know, leaders, we may appear to lead projects and outcomes, but none of that is possible unless we know how to lead people. However, to lead people, we need a higher level of self and other awareness. Could you be leading a team of traumatized individuals and not even know it? Could you be walking around with trauma and be unaware? Now, I hear you saying, no way. I would know. Well, most people believe that they're self-aware, but true self-awareness is actually a very rare quality. In fact, HBR did a nearly 5-year research program on the subject, and they discovered that although 95% of people think they're self-aware, only 10 to 15% are actually aware. So what might you be missing, and what might be the impact of that? Well, we're going to find out about that on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. If you're curious to know more, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's the most binge-worthy podcast on the internet. You get to sit in and tune into some of the most interesting and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people, including today's guest, by the way. We have people like astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, multi-Grammy award-winning entertainers, and some folks you might think you'd completely disagree with, you're going to find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help to stay relevant. So please get over to there, to wherever there is. Do us a favor, please. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are deeply honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Early in the pandemic, I was being interviewed by the media about what I believed would be the unexpected. They were asking me, what do you think will be the unexpected impact of the pandemic on business? And I said, we need, as business and as leaders, we need to prepare for an epidemic of emotional fallout from the economic and emotional physical stress of isolation. That this situation is likely to push people into a psychological traumatized response that no one is fully prepared for, including, maybe especially, the people who are experiencing that. Well, you may have heard that with the loosening of travel restrictions and the availability of vaccines, travel, especially air travel, is booming. However, American and Southwest Airlines have both postponed serving alcohol amid a surge in in-flight violence. According to the Flight Attendants Union, in one incident, an attendant lost 2 teeth. What's going on, and what's that got to do with you? Well, it's exactly what we were talking about at the beginning. So let's find out together, because today we are honored to have as our guest someone who is at the cutting edge. He is someone you are going to be hearing a lot about over the next few years. He is a doctor who is transforming our understanding of trauma, and is doing so with the most innovative and quick procedure of our time. Dr. Eugene Lipov is an extraordinary doctor who has found a universal cure for trauma that has 0 side effects. Dr. Lipov is a world-renowned, board-certified anesthesiologist, I always fumble that word, and a medical researcher who is one of the world's foremost experts on trauma's effects on the nervous system, that fight or flight response, and its effect on the human body. Dr. Lipov has developed this innovative procedure, the stellar ganglion block, or SGB, which relieves PTSD patients from suffering from the symptoms of the condition, allowing them to live fuller lives without pain or an overstimulated nervous system. As the leading expert in his field, his research has earned him an invitation to testify before the U.S. House Committee on Veterans Affairs in 2010. Dr. Lipov seems to be a rising star. He is being interviewed on a large number of topics outside of the usual expertise on PTSD treatment. In fact, he's presently in negotiation around a book and a movie based on his unique process. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me to welcome the creator of the Lipov procedure, the Dual Sympathetic Reset, a man whose patient is called the Miracle Man, Dr. Eugene Lipov! And the crowd goes wild, young man.
Wow.
Good to have you here, mate. I am honored. I'm really honored. I'm looking forward to this conversation. You know, I should tell people that you and I have become friends over the last year or two, and the work you're doing is extraordinary. And before we get into the depth of that, one of the questions I like to ask my guests is, what is the question about leadership that we're kind of ignoring that we need to be paying attention to?
From my perspective is, if somebody is traumatized, and certainly all of us are traumatized more or less, but I think a significant trauma can go unnoticed. So the people can tell you, people around you, like if you have a spouse who you can actually trust, they'll tell you when you're behaving erratically or inappropriately.
Right.
If you feel that something happens and all of a sudden you feel this emotional overload and you feel like you're shutting down, or you're short with people when you don't want to be. Your body and your mind is saying something is not working right.
Right.
So I think that's a big thing. So, and then once you become cognizant of that, then I think you can start to look for treatments. And there's a number of treatments available. Some of the simplest ones and highly effective are meditation, exercise, unplugging for a bit, because the time when you think as a leader, your company is struggling during COVID, let's say.
Yes.
That's when you're putting in extra hours. You're not sleeping right, and you're pushing everybody to the brink. You may be doing much more harm than good by doing all of that.
So as the leader, you may not be noticing that you're traumatized by all this, you know, many factors, not, you know, it's because I think that when we think of trauma, we think of a big event, you know, that's the category, right? You know, you were at war, you've got PTSD, you were raped, you've got PTSD. There's this big event, but I think that in leadership, we don't notice that oftentimes it's cumulative, that there's these little things that are going on. And in COVID, we've seen a lot of that. In the pandemic and the isolation, we've seen more of that. So the leader themselves may be traumatized, and the people they're leading may in fact be traumatized. Is that right?
Correct. So everybody could be traumatized. And if you think about it, at let's look at the example you gave about the stewardess being hit. So the person was probably traumatized and were trying to take the trauma for a little swim with alcohol. They would try to calm themselves down.
Yes.
And then when that became excessive to the extent they lost self-control, now they became violent and they really start becoming hyper-aggressive. So think of a lot of leaders drink to excess.
Yes.
I've talked to some people who spend a lot of time in Wall Street, and they're highly stressed, and they have to unplug all the time, and they're always hyped up.
Right.
And then they can't go to sleep, so they do X to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes medicinal, sometimes not as medicinal, sometimes alcohol. So now the sleep is disturbed, and now they have to wake themselves up in the morning by whichever method you're doing it.
Right.
So you're always going
14 cups of coffee or a long line of powder.
Exactly, something. It does not optimize your cognitive function. So the point is you need to optimize the cognitive function, and you need to have one or hopefully more than one person you can actually trust that will tell you what you're doing.
Okay, so let's pause that for a minute, because I think that now we've sort of planted that seed that is around self-awareness. But as humans, as leaders, we often don't see or we dismiss something until it's too late. And in the context of trauma, that's clear to me that that's happening all over the place. So I would love for you to talk to us about the scientist Ignaz Semmelweis, I believe his name is. He was known as the savior of mothers. Tell us a little bit about him, because I think this is going to give people an awareness of what they're not aware of.
Well, that's my favorite cautionary tale in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a physician. He was Hungarian born, and he was going to medical school in Austria. At that time, it was the leading edge in medicine. And then what he noticed is that when women delivered children in a hospital by gynecologists, the chance of the death from infection was 3 times higher compared to when it was being done at home by midwives.
All right, so let's put a pause in that for a minute, because I want that to sink in for people. So you're at home, you have a baby, pretty good chance your baby, back in those days, your baby could die, but that was 3 times higher if you went and had it delivered by a gynecologist who was, quote, an expert. Is that right?
In a hospital, yes.
In a hospital, right.
And not a baby would die, the mother would die.
Oh, the mother would die.
The mother would die.
Right.
So he was trying to understand what it was. So he looked at it and he thought, you must be transmitting something to the doctors. So he told the doctors, you must be transmitting something. So he looked at what was being done. So it turned out the doctors of the day would go in, dissect dead bodies to figure out why they died, and then run over, sometimes literally, and deliver the children without washing their hands.
Without washing their hands.
Yeah, nobody was washing their hands at that time. And the thought was that it was bad humors that transmitted disease. If it didn't smell bad, there is no transmission of disease.
Oh, so they believed you could only transmit a disease that you could smell.
Basically.
Wow.
So
okay.
He wrote papers on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to the doctors and they said, you need to wash your hands. I don't know why, but you're killing mothers. So the doctors believed that he was calling them dirty. Yes. And they pushed him so hard, whichever way, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward and he was beaten to death there within a month of admission. 20 years later, Pasteur figured out the germ theory. And then he said, well, that's why you need to wash your hands. So posthumously, of course, the doctor was, hailed as a hero for saving mothers. But he was quite dead at that point.
Yeah, but not much use when you're dead. So let's put that in the context of trauma. So help us to grasp that in the context of trauma, because that's a powerful story about a guy who can see something that other people are ignoring, and he's made wrong and dies because he's made wrong. But what does that mean to us in the context of trauma that when we don't see it?
Well, I think that's a cautionary tale of ignoring things, and it shows you how slow to adopt change the medical system truly is.
Mm.
So I think part of the reason you and I have discussed this case, Jamie definitely and I discussed this at length, and to me, it's very important to kind of persist in the right direction. I think it's important. But the other part is, if the entire medical system says you're wrong, it doesn't mean you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a lot of pushback in the beginning of treating PTSD using stellate ganglion block or hot flashes using stellate ganglion block. I've had people insult me in a local newspaper.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously end up in an asylum beaten to death, but there's a modern version of that. It's still pretty harsh. Nonetheless, you're telling this cautionary tale. You're making people aware of something that they're ignoring, and you've created a solution, i.e., washing your hands. But you've created a solution that is actually very quick. I mean, it's not like going in and doing a brain surgery. You created something that's very quick. Just before we move on, I want people to have a grasp of how long is the procedure, because I think when people think about this, they don't know what it is, of course. So you're doing this medical procedure on them for PTSD. People may be imagining that this is, 20 years of therapy. They may be imagining that it's equestrian therapy where they stroke horses. They may be imagining it's ayahuasca in Peru. They may be imagining it's a brain surgery. So how long does it actually take?
The actual procedure?
The actual procedure?
5 to 7 minutes.
Now, can you hear that, folks? 5 to 7 minutes. No trip to Peru. No 20 years on a couch. Okay. No guy banging a drum with a long ponytail. 5 to 7 minutes. No brain surgery. 5 to 7 minutes. And this is something that I think is very profound and we need to pay attention to. Not just that it's fast, but let's look at this term for a moment that we've all become very familiar with, which is PTSD. PTSD. I want to talk to you for a moment, Eugene, about the D in PTSD and why we've got that wrong, and what you're addressing and how you're dealing with it is actually dissolving the D off the PTS. It's like this work is about, let's take an eraser and rub off the D because it's not a D. Unless I'm wrong. Go ahead.
I think the term should be changed.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, let's take the term away and put a new term instead of it.
Thank you.
So I have a friend, Dr. Frank Agbert, who's a very famous psychiatrist. He came up with the term Stockholm Syndrome, which most people have heard of. So he believes the term PTSD should be called PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, meaning there is a biological change in the brain following trauma of some sort. So there is a change of sympathetic system, overactivation of that. And you can actually see that on a functional MRI or a PET scan. So when people say PTSD is an invisible wound, my answer is it's invisible if you have the wrong scanner. If you just look at it, like if you have a fractured leg and you look at it with your eye, you don't see it. Okay. If you take an X-ray, you go, well, there's a fracture. This is the same thing. So functional MRI is what's making neuroscience so amazing at this point. You can actually see part of the brain activate.
But the idea of PTSD is that this is a disorder, and for many people who have been traumatized through whatever situation are often very shy about coming forward and saying that because of the label of the D, right? I've got a disorder, and it feels pretty permanent. It feels like, like it's there's something mentally wrong with me, as opposed to the physiology of my body is not working in a way. And you're saying, hold on a second. Yes, there is a psychological, mental result, but that result is because of a physiological response. Is that correct?
Yes. Let me give you an easier way to look at it, if I may.
Thank you.
If you look at the brain as a computer,
Yes.
the computer has hardware and software.
Yes.
So to me, the physiologic change of sympathetic overactivation, fight and flight overactivation, is a biologic change. Thus, it's a hardware problem. Until you fix the hardware problem, you can have the patches and the software, and it's not going to work. So when we fix the hardware problem, i.e. doing stellate ganglion block, which reduces overactivation of sympathetics, then the patch or psychotherapy can work much better. I'll give you an example of that. I took care of a guy who was 18 years old in Vietnam. He came to see me in a very terrible shape. He had 40 years of psychotherapy, 40.
Wow.
Right? And he was taking tons of drugs. He was not doing well. So I did 2 stellate ganglion blocks on him 12 years ago. He had psychotherapy for another 3 months, and he got off all the drugs, and he became a very nice man. There was a significant change.
So when you say a nice man, what does that mean compared to what?
Compared to throwing his wife into the wall, compared to breaking dishes, being aggressive, being a nastiest guy in this particular military retired unit. He became like people called me, they go, what happened? What happened to Raleigh? He's nice. He's not being an asshole on a continuous basis. Speaking of terms, let me tell you, it's my favorite new term for stellate ganglion block. So I've been fortunate enough to spend some time in Fort Bragg.
Yes.
I do about 30 to 40 stellates there a week now. So they call it the asshole shot.
The ass?
Asshole shot.
The asshole shot.
Right.
Shouldn't it be the de-asshole shot?
No. Hold on. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
So when the guys have the block, stellate ganglion block, and they get a lot better, if it's coming back and they're becoming asshole again, the wife go, you got to go get your asshole shot again so you stop being an asshole.
That is fantastic. I love that.
That's my diagnosis. That's my new diagnosis. So if you think about, speaking of leaders, if they're being always assholes, right? They're being nasty and people are leaving in droves because they're being mistreated or whatever. It may be time to stop and look and say, hey, maybe I have
maybe you need an asshole shot.
Fight and flight system, right? And it's like, well, I'm being an asshole. Let's treat that condition.
But this is, I think I love that, but I think that this is, as we come towards the end of the first half of the show, this is the thing I want people to grasp, is that this is first and foremost, it's treatable, but second of all, I think that there's a great deal of shame around trauma, and I'm very concerned with shame. Because we have these behaviors, and then things happen, whatever those things are, we become traumatized, and then we behave badly and we shame ourselves. I'm always shamed around those behaviors, and it becomes this vicious cycle. Because if I admit that I've got a problem, then I'd have to go, I'd have to admit, and I might be wrong. So I'll dig deeper into the issue, and a 5 to 7 minute procedure can change that and allow you to move to a more neutral state where your adrenal system is not highly all the time, because, when we look at this, I mean, one of the clues I want to give people is something called hypervigilance. And you may or may not be familiar with that term. It's a familiar term in psychology, but what it means is it's this hyper awareness of things that are around you, where you may even get it as a compliment, like you catch things other people miss. That's hypervigilance. You develop that for a reason. And if you've got that all the time, it doesn't mean you're psychic. It means you're probably traumatized and you're in that excessive fight flight response. I personally have never experienced that in my own life. Not talking about me, of course, but I've known somebody. Yeah. So, so that awareness of that hypervigilant response that's another clue that you've been traumatized. And in the second part of the show, I want to talk about how trauma and leadership and even the drive to success. And we talked about this on Curiosity Bites. So if you want to know more, you can find out in there. But how trauma and the drive to success go hand in hand. And if you treat the trauma, it doesn't mean you'll be less successful, but it does mean you'll be more fulfilled and you'll be more joyous. And we're going to come into that in the second part of the show. As we come to the winding of this first part of the show, Eugene, I would love for you to tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, because they might want to click through between the two shows, find out more about you, about the procedures, etc.
Sure. If you'd like to look up Dr. Dr. Eugene, Eugene Lipov, Lipov.com, or eraseptsdnow.org. I'd like to add one thing to your comment.
Please.
Introduction. You said stellar ganglion block cures PTSD. I think it controls the symptoms for months or years, but it all depends on how long the patient had it, and it also depends on the biology, and it also depends how much new trauma they had.
Right.
I just wanted people to think it's like, nobody is claiming that one shot and everybody's perfect. It may take multiple shots. It also may take a lot more psychotherapy and some work. But what it does do is really reduce the sympathetic fight and flight system rapidly, and it may last for years.
Right. And we can talk about more about that as we come back, because I think that it is important to understand that there's no such thing as a one size fits all for anything, but this does some pretty miraculous work, particularly, as I said, that your version of it is quite unique and is doing it in a different way than, because this is not new. There's 100 years of this, but the impact of the way you're doing it is significantly different. So we're going to come back for part 2. We're going to talk more about that, about the impact and about how long that impact is. And we'll also talk about the driving force of success and leadership and how it's tied to trauma, and how treating whatever that trauma might be is not going to make you less successful, but is going to make your life a heck of a lot more enriched and fulfilled. So, as I said, we'll post all of the links so you can reach out to Dr. Eugene Lipov in the show notes. So please go there. I encourage you to go and find out more. It's fascinating and insightful and mind-blowing when you see the results. Till next time, remember, we're just one click away from part 2. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. We'll see you in part 2.